with concerned friends of goodwill all over the nation. It is particularly a great privilege to discuss these issues with members of the academic community who are constantly writing about and dealing with the problems that we face, and who have come or have the tremendous responsibility of molding the minds of young men and women all over the country. In the preface of their book, Applied Sociology, S.M. Miller and Alvin Goldner state, "It is the historic mission of the social sciences to enable mankind to take possession of society. It follows that for Negroes who substantially are excluded from society, this science is needed even more desperately than for any other group in the population. For social scientists, the opportunity to serve in a life-giving purpose is a humanist challenge of rare distinction. Negroes, too, are eager for a rendezvous with truth and discovery. We are aware that social scientists, unlike some of their colleagues in the physical sciences, have been spared the grim feelings of guilt that attended the invention of nuclear weapons of destruction. Social scientists in the main are fortunate to be able to extirpate evil, not to invent it. If the Negro needs social sciences for direction and for self-understanding, the white society is in even more urgent need. White America needs to understand that it is poisoned to its soul by racism, and the understanding needs to be carefully documented and consequently more difficult to reject. The present crisis arises because although it is historically imperative that our society take the next step to equality, we find ourselves psychologically and socially in prison. All too many white Americans are horrified not with the conditions of the Negro or Negro life, but with the products of these conditions, the Negro himself. White America is seeking to keep the walls of segregation substantially intact while the evolution of society and the Negro's desperation is causing them to crumble. The white majority, unprepared and unwilling to accept radical structural change, is resisting and producing chaos while complaining that if there were no chaos, orderly change would come. Negroes want the social scientists to address the white community and tell it like it is. White America has an appalling lack of knowledge concerning the reality of Negro life. One reason some advances were made in the South during the past decade was the discovery by Northern whites of the brutal facts of Southern segregated life. It was the Negro who educated the nation by dramatizing the evils through nonviolent protest. The social scientists played little or no role in disclosing truth. The Negro Action Movement, with raw courage, did it virtually alone. When the majority of the country could not live with the extremes of the brutality they witnessed, political remedies were enacted and customs were altered. These partial advances were, however, limited principally to the South, and progress did not automatically spread throughout the nation. There was also little depth to the changes. White America stopped murder. But that is not the same thing as ordaining brotherhood, nor is the ending of lynch rule the same thing as inaugurating justice. After some years of Negro-white unity and partial success, white America shifted gears and went into reverse. Negroes, alive with hope and enthusiasm, ran into sharply stiffened white resistance at all levels, and bitter tensions broke out in sporadic episodes of violence. New lines of hostility were drawn, and the era of good feeling disappeared. The decade of 1955 to 1965, with its constructive elements, misled us. Everyone, activists and social scientists, underestimated the amount of violence and rage Negroes were suppressing and the amount of bigotry the white majority was disguising. Science should have employed more fully to warn us that the Negro, after 350 years of handicaps, mired in an intricate network of contemporary barriers, could not be ushered into the equality by tentative and superficial changes. Mass nonviolent protests, a social invention of Negroes, were effective in Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma, enforcing national legislation which served to change Negro life sufficiently to curb explosions. But when changes were confined to the South alone, the North, in the absence of change, began to seethe. The freedom movement did not adapt its tactics to the different and unique northern urban conditions. It failed to see that nonviolent marches in the South were forms of rebellion. When Negroes took over the streets and shops, found the means to force relatively radical change in their environment. In the North, on the other hand, street demonstrations were not even a mild expression of militancy. The turmoil of city absorbs demonstrations as merely transitory drama, which is ordinary in city life. Without a more effective tactic for upsetting the status quo, the power structure could remain its intransigence and hostility. Into the vacuum of inaction, violence and riots flowed, and a new period opened. Urban riots must now be recognized as durable social phenomena. They may be deplored, but they are there and should be understood. Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections. The rioters are not seeking to seize territory or to attain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. They are a distorted form of social protest. The looting, which is their principal feature, serves many functions. It enables the most enraged and deprived Negro to take hold of consumer goods with the ease the white man does by using his purse. Often the Negro does not even want what he takes. He wants the experience of taking. But most of all, alienated from society and knowing that this society cherishes property above people, he is shocking it by abusing property rights. There are thus elements of emotional catharsis in the violent act. This may explain why most cities in which riots have occurred have not had a repetition, even though the causative conditions remain. It is also noteworthy that the amount of physical harm done to white people other than police is infinitesimal, and in Detroit, whites and Negroes looted in unity. The profound judgment of today's riots was expressed by Victor Hugo a century ago. He said, if a soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sins, but he who causes the darkness. The policymakers of the white society have caused the darkness. They create discrimination. They structure slums, and they perpetuate unemployment. It is incontestable and deplorable that Negroes have committed crimes, but they are derivative crimes. They are born of the greater crimes of the white society. When we ask Negroes to abide by the law, let us also demand that the white man abide by the law in the ghettos. Day in and day out, he violates welfare laws to deprive the poor of their meager allotments. He flagrantly violates building codes and regulations. His police make a mockery of the law and he violates laws on equal employment and education and the provisions for civic services. Slums are the handiwork of a vicious system of the white society. Negroes live in them, but do not make them any more than a prisoner makes a prison. Let us say boldly that if the violations of law by the white man in the slums over the years were calculated and compared with the law breaking of a few days of riots, the hardened criminal would be the white man. These are often difficult things to say. But I have come to see more and more that it is necessary to utter the truth in order to deal with the great problems that we face in our society. There is another cause of riots that is too important to mention casually. The war in Vietnam. Here again, we are dealing with a controversial issue. But I am convinced that the war in Vietnam has played havoc with our domestic destinies. The bombs that fall in Vietnam explode at home. It does not take much to see what great damage this war has done to the image of our nation. It has left our country politically and morally isolated in the world, where our only friends happen to be puppet nations like Taiwan and Thailand and South Korea. The major allies in the world that have been with us in war and peace are not with us in this war. As a result, we find ourselves socially and politically isolated. As I looked at what this war was going to do to our nation and to the domestic situation and to the civil rights movement, I found it necessary to speak vigorously out against it. My speaking out against the war has not gone without criticism. There are those who tell me that I should stick with civil rights and to stay in my place. I can only respond that I have fought too hard and too long to end segregated public accommodations to segregate my own moral concerns. It is my deep convictions that justice is indivisible, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. For those who tell me I am hurting the civil rights movement and ask, don't you think that in order to be respected and in order to regain support, you must stop talking against the war? I can only say that I am not a consensus leader. I do not seek to determine what is right and wrong by taking a Gallup poll to determine majority opinion. And it is again my deep conviction that ultimately a genuine leader is not a searcher of consensus, but a molder of consensus. On some position, cowardice acts is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience must ask the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a stand that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but one must take a stand because it is right. And that is where I find myself today. Moreover, I am convinced, even if war continues, that a genuine massive act of concern will do more to quell riots than the most massive deployment of troops. The unemployment of the Negro youth ranges up to 40% in some slums. The riots are more entirely youth events. The age range of participants is from 13 to 25. What hypocrisy it is to talk of saving the new generation, to make it the generation of hope, while consigning it to unemployment and provoking it to violent alternatives. When our nation was bankrupt in the 30s, we created an agency to provide jobs to all at their existing level of skill. In our overwhelming affluence today, what excuse is there for not setting up a national agency for full employment immediately? The other program, which would give reality to hope and opportunity, would be the demolition of the slums to be replaced by decent housing built by residents of the ghettos. These programs are not eminently sound and vitally needed, but they have the support of an overwhelming majority of the nation, white and Negro. The country support a works program to provide employment to all, and an equally astonishing 65% approve a program to tear down the slums. There is a program and there is heavy majority support for it. Yet the administration and Congress tinker with trivial proposals to limit cost and an extravagant gamble with disaster. The president has lamented that he cannot persuade Congress. He can, if the will is there, go to the people, mobilize the people's support, and thereby substantially increase his power to persuade Congress. Our most urgent task is to find tactics that will move the government, no matter how determined it is to resist. I believe we will have to find the militant middle ground between riots on the one hand and weak and timid supplication for justice on the other hand. The middle ground, I believe, is civil disobedience. It can be aggressive, but not violent. It can dislocate, but not destroy. The specific planning will take some study and analyses to avoid mistakes of the past when it was employed on too small a scale, and sustained briefly. Civil disobedience can restore Negro-white unity. There have been some very important sane white voices even during the most desperate moments of riots. One reason is that the urban crisis intersects the Negro crisis in the city. Many white decision makers may care little about saving the Negro, but they must care about saving their cities. The vast majority of production is created in cities. Most white Americans live in them. The suburbs to which they flee cannot exist detached from the cities. Hence, powerful white elements have goals that merge with ours. Now, there are many roles for social scientists in meeting these problems. Kenneth Clark has said that Negroes are moved by a suicide instinct in riots, and Negroes know there is a tragic truth in this observation. Social scientists should also disclose the suicide instinct that governs the administration and Congress in their total failure to respond constructively. What other areas are there for social scientists to assist the civil rights movement? There are many, but I would like to suggest 3 because they have an urgent quality. Social science may be able to search out some answers to the problem of Negro leadership. E. Franklin Frazier, in his profound work, Black Bourgeoisie, laid painfully bare the tendency of the upwardly mobile Negro to separate from his community, divorce himself from the responsibility to it, while failing to gain acceptance in the white community. There has been significant improvements from the days Frazier researched, but anyone knowledgeable about Negro life knows its middle class is not bearing its weight. Every riot has carried strong overtones of hostility of lower class Negroes toward the affluent Negro and vice versa. No contemporary study of scientific depth has totally studied this problem. Social science should be able to suggest mechanisms to create a wholesome black unity and sense of peoplehood while the process of integration proceeds. As one example of this gap in research, there are no studies, to my knowledge, to explain adequately the absence of Negro trade union leadership. 85% of Negroes are working people. Some 2 million are in trade unions, but in 50 years we have only produced one national leader, A. Philip Randolph. Discrimination explains a great deal, but not everything. The picture is so dark, even a few rays of light may signal useful direction. The second area of scientific examination is political action. In the past 2 decades, Negroes have expended more effort in the quest of the franchise than they have in other campaigns combined. Demonstrations, sit-ins, and marches, though more spectacular, are dwarfed by the enormous number of man-hours expended to register millions, particularly in the South. The need for penetrating massive scientific study of this subject cannot be overstated. Lipset in 1957 asserted that a limitation in focus in political sociology has resulted in a failure of much contemporary research to consider a number of significant theoretical questions. The time is short for social scientists to illuminate this critically important area. The third area of study concerns psychological and ideological changes in Negroes. It is fashionable now to be pessimistic. Undeniably, the freedom movement has incurred setbacks. Yet I still believe that there are significant aspects to Negro progress. Social science is needed to explain where this development is going to take us. Are we moving away? Not from integration, but from the society which made it a problem in the first place? How deep and at what rate of speed is this progress occurring? There are some vital questions to be answered if we are to have a clear sense of our direction. Thus, it may be well that our world is in dire need of new organization. The International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment. Men and women should be as maladjusted as the prophet Amos, who, in the midst of injustices of his day, could cry out in words that echo across the centuries, "Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Or as maladjusted as Abraham Lincoln, who in the midst of his vacillations finally came to see that this nation could not survive half slave and half free. Or as maladjusted as Thomas Jefferson, who in the midst of an age amazingly adjusted to slavery could scratch across the pages of history words lifted to cosmic proportions. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with by their Creator certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And through such creative maladjustment, we may be able to emerge from the bleak and desolate midnight of man's inhumanity to man into the bright and glittery daybreak of freedom and justice. I have not lost hope. I must confess that these have been very difficult days for me personally. And these have been difficult days for every civil rights leader, for every lover of justice and peace. Thank you.